The desert did not forgive weakness. It was the first lesson Iona had learned as a child. Standing in the blistering sun, while her father pressed a bow into her small hands. She was of the Chiricahua Apache, a daughter of warriors, trained to run without tiring, to see what others overlooked, to strike without hesitation. Years had hardened her, not just her calloused palms or her steady draw of the bowstring, but her silence. Silence was strength, and strength was survival. That morning, the canyon air still hummed with the residue of last night's storm. The dry earth smelled of wet stone, and faint rivulets of water carved fragile paths through the dust. Iona was perched high on a rocky ledge, bow balanced across her knees, black hair braided tightly against her back. She was scouting for signs of movement, enemies, game, or anything out of place. It was then she saw him. At first only a blur, pale against the deep red of the desert cliffs. A man, stumbling, his boots caught on loose stone, sending him pitching forward, catching himself just before collapse. His clothes were torn from thorns. Sunburn laced his neck and arms, and his gait was uneven, the gait of prey already wounded. But it was his eyes that held her still, wide, frantic, and darting over his shoulder as though he expected death to snatch him at any breath. Behind him, faint but distinct, came the rhythm of hoofbeats. Riders. Iona's body moved before her mind did. She slid down the rocky incline, bow rising, scanning the horizon. The man fell again, this time staying down, chest heaving in ragged gasps. His skin was too pale, too soft, his movements clumsy. This was no warrior. He was white, an outsider, one her people would not welcome, one she should leave. But the riders were close now. Mexican bounty hunters, she guessed, by the sound of their calls carried on the wind. They had been encroaching deeper into Apache territory in recent moons, bringing guns, rope, and greed. The man on the ground, whether foolish traveler, runaway, or worse, would be butchered before he had a chance to explain himself. Iona drew her bow. The first rider appeared between the rocks, rifle slung across his back, scanning for his quarry. Her arrow left the string with a sharp hiss, cutting clean through the space and sinking deep into his chest. He toppled from the saddle, dead before his body struck the earth. Another rider whipped his head toward the sound. She loosed again. He cried out, clawing at the shaft jutting from his throat, then crumpled in the dust. The last two, startled, pulled their mounts sharply, retreating down the canyon with curses that echoed after them. Iona lowered her bow, breathing steady, as if she had done nothing more than scare off a pack of coyotes. The pale man on the ground gaped at her, disbelief etched across his dirt-streaked face. His lips moved as though to speak, but no sound came out. Finally, his voice cracked, rough from thirst. You saved me." Iona did not answer. Her gaze raked over him like an appraisal. Thin frame, blistered hands, clothes meant for towns, not wilderness. He was no soldier, not a hunter, not anything that belonged here. Still, she stepped closer. "You will die," she said flatly, her Apache tongue thick against the English words. "If you stay here," he blinked at her, swallowing hard. I think I'm already half dead." His accent marked him as Eastern-born, soft with rounded vowels. She crouched beside him, close enough to see the tremor in his hands. He flinched when she reached for the pouch at her belt, but she only pulled a small water skin, pressing it to his lips. The man drank greedily, coughing when the water was too much, then lowering it with shaking fingers. His eyes lifted to hers, softer now, though still shadowed by fear. Why help me?" Iona studied him in silence, her expression unreadable. She did not know why herself. Her people would call her reckless, perhaps even traitor, for aiding a white man. But leaving him would have been to watch a wounded bird fall. Too cruel, even for her hardened heart. Finally, she answered. "Because you were hunted, and I do not like hunters." He gave a hollow laugh, though his eyes shone wet. "Then I owe you my life." "No," she corrected sharply, standing, bow in hand once more. "You owe me your silence. If my people know of you, you will not live long enough to thank me." The man's throat bobbed as he nodded. He tried to push himself up, stumbled, then steadied against the rock. His voice was quieter now, almost childlike. What do I call you? Iona hesitated, then offered the truth. Iona. He repeated it clumsily, tongue unfamiliar with the syllables. Iona. Then, after a beat, he added, I'm Daniel. Her dark eyes held his a moment longer, measuring the weight of that name. Daniel. It felt as fragile as his frame. She turned sharply, scanning the canyon. Get up, she ordered. They will return. If you wish to live, you follow me. If you fall behind, I leave you. Daniel swallowed and nodded again, dragging himself upright. He was clumsy, stumbling in the loose earth, but he followed. And though Iona told herself it was only survival that made her shield him with her bow, something quieter coiled beneath her ribs. Not trust. Not yet, but something. Something that would grow. The canyon was silent except for Daniel's stumbling breath and the scrape of his boots against stone. Iona moved ahead with a panther's quiet grace, bow at her back, knife at her hip, eyes always on the ridges above. She didn't look back often, but every time she did, he was still there. Clumsy, awkward, too loud. But there. The sun climbed high, scalding the earth. Heat shimmered above the sand, bending the horizon into mirages. Daniel wiped at his brow with a torn sleeve, his pale skin already red and raw. His shirt clung to him with sweat, his chest heaving as though he'd never learned how to pace himself. How much farther? He croaked, voice breaking. Iona didn't slow. Far, he groaned under his breath. Figures. When he tripped again, landing on his knees in the dust, she finally turned. Her gaze was sharp, unreadable. She walked back to him, crouched, and without a word, shoved her water skin toward his chest. Daniel blinked at it, then at her. You don't have to. I don't. Her voice was clipped, final. Drink. He obeyed, though slower this time, taking measured sips before handing it back. His lips were cracked, his throat raw, but his eyes followed her with something strange in them. Not just gratitude, something softer, something she ignored. You move like you're made for this place, he said quietly. I am, she replied simply. And me? He asked with a humorless laugh. I'm like a rabbit dropped in with wolves. She didn't argue. Instead, she stood, glanced at the canyon mouth. Come, they will search. We must be hidden before night. They pressed onward until the canyon narrowed into twisting paths, walls rising steep and jagged. Iona moved with confidence, weaving through the labyrinth as if she had walked it her whole life. Daniel stumbled after her, brushing against thorn bushes, swearing softly when his clothes snagged. Finally, they reached a hollow beneath an overhanging rock. Shadow cooled the air there, and the faint trickle of water seeped from the stone into a shallow pool. Iona knelt immediately, cupping water into her palms to drink, then refilling her pouch. Daniel fell beside her, nearly plunging face first into the pool before she shoved him back with a firm hand. Not like that, she snapped. Slow, or you will sicken. He froze, then chuckled weakly. I guess you've saved me twice now. She ignored him, rinsing her hands in the pool. The desert air carried silence between them, broken only by the faint buzz of insects. Daniel's voice softened. Those men, the ones chasing me. If you hadn't been there, I'd be... He cut himself off, jaw tightening. Iona's eyes flicked toward him. Why? He looked up, startled. Why what? Why are they hunting you? Daniel's gaze faltered. He picked at the frayed edge of his sleeve, his mouth working soundlessly before words came. I saw something I shouldn't have. Wrong place, wrong time. Men who don't like witnesses. His eyes darkened, shadowed with something she didn't yet believe but didn't press. He met her gaze again, nervous. You probably shouldn't have saved me. I'll only bring you trouble. Her face was stone, unreadable. I decide who is trouble. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw something flicker there. Not kindness exactly, but something steadier, a recognition. He swallowed, heart heavy. As night fell, the desert grew sharp with cold. Iona lit no fire, crouching close to the stone wall, scanning the horizon. Daniel sat nearby, shivering, his thin frame trembling in the wind. You don't sleep? He asked softly. Not when hunted, she answered. He pulled his knees to his chest. Do you ever get tired of carrying everything yourself? Ahiona's head turned sharply. Her eyes caught the starlight, hard as obsidian. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a low voice, she replied, A warrior does not speak of tired. A warrior endures. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost a sigh. Guess I'm no warrior. She didn't answer, but her gaze lingered on him longer than before. The wind howled through the canyon that night, and though she told herself she was only listening for riders, only watching the ridges, Ahiona's ears caught every uneven breath from Daniel, every shiver. He was fragile, soft, the kind her world would chew apart and spit into the sand. And yet, she had saved him, and she would again, if she must, even if it meant hiding him not just from the riders, but from her own people. The mountains loomed higher as dusk bled across the sky, their sharp ridges cutting into the last streaks of light. The shadows grew thick, swallowing the desert floor until only the crackle of insects and the faint sigh of the wind remained. Nalin had chosen a path few would dare tread, a ravine known only to those raised in its silence. She moved with sure steps, even in the fading light, her bow still slung across her shoulder. The man stumbled behind her, his boots slipping on loose stones, breath heavy from the climb. Keep quiet, she whispered, her voice low but sharp. The traveler nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. His pale hands trembled, though he tried to hide it. She noticed anyway. She noticed everything. The way his gaze darted nervously toward every shadow, the way his legs shook like a fawn's. He was soft, untested, his survival balanced on her decision alone. They pressed deeper into the ravine until the rocks opened into a hollow, a small cave hidden by brush. Nalin crouched, pushing branches aside. Inside, she ordered. He ducked in, the scrape of his clothes against stone loud in the hush of twilight. When she followed, the air turned cool, damp. She set down her bow and crouched near the opening, eyes scanning the darkness outside. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, like the weight of the mountains themselves pressing in. Finally, his voice broke it. You saved me, he said softly. Why? Her jaw tightened. She hadn't asked herself that, not fully. It had been instinct, the swift pull of a bowstring, the release that struck down the man who would have taken his life. But instinct was dangerous. Instinct could make her betray her people without meaning to. I do not know, she admitted flatly. Perhaps I should not have. His face fell, but he didn't argue. He drew his knees to his chest, staring at the cave floor. If you hadn't, I'd be dead. Perhaps that is what should have been, she replied. You are not one of us. And hiding you? Her eyes narrowed as her hand brushed the bowstring. If they find you here, they will not forgive me. The truth of it hung in the air. She would be seen as a traitor, one who turned her back on her blood. The punishment would be swift. Yet as she studied him, the dirt on his face, the fear behind his eyes, the way his chest rose and fell too quickly, something in her chest stirred. He was weak, yes, but not cruel. Not like the soldiers she had seen before. What is your name? She asked suddenly. He blinked, surprised. Thomas, he said after a pause. Thomas Reed. Nalin, she said, giving her own in return. Daughter of warriors. Thomas gave a small, nervous smile. It suits you. She ignored the warmth that flickered at the words. It was foolish. Names meant nothing. Survival meant everything. As the night deepened, she lit a small fire, careful to keep the flames low. The glow painted the stone walls in shifting amber. Thomas leaned close, stretching his hands toward the warmth. His skin looked even paler in the firelight, almost ghostly against the dark. You are far from home, she said, her tone clipped. I was looking for trade routes, he said hesitantly. Maps, land, places no one's crossed yet. But they... His voice cracked and his gaze dropped. They chased me, said I had no right being here. Nellin's brow furrowed. She had heard of such things. Men wandering into lands they did not belong, stirring anger wherever they stepped. Perhaps he had been foolish. Perhaps he deserved the chase, and yet the hunted look in his eyes was real. "You do not belong," she said, repeating the truth. "I know," he admitted. His voice was so small it almost vanished under the crackle of the fire. "But I'm glad you didn't let me die out there." The words hung between them, heavy with something unspoken. Nolan's chest tightened. She looked away, eyes on the shadows at the mouth of the cave. "You will rest tonight," she said. "At dawn we move. But if you slow me down, I leave you." He nodded quickly, though his gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. Soft and searching, as if trying to understand why a hardened warrior would show him mercy at all. Outside, the coyotes called to each other in the dark. Inside, the fire burned low, its light flickering across two souls who should never have met. The Apache woman bound by blood and oath, and the white traveler with nothing but fear and gratitude. Neither spoke again, but sleep did not come easily. The desert stretched endless and unyielding beneath the rising sun. Sand shimmered like molten gold, and heat waves rose from the cracked earth, bending reality and mirages alike. Nalin led Thomas with deliberate, precise steps, her feet barely scuffing the sand. The white traveler stumbled after her, his boots ill-suited for the terrain, sunburns already deepening on his neck and hands. "You can't just walk like this forever," Thomas grumbled, voice raspy. "Watch your footing," Nalin replied, voice flat. "Every step counts," he faltered again, nearly twisting an ankle over a jagged stone. Nalin caught his arm instinctively. His eyes widened, startled by the sudden contact. "Thank you," he whispered. She didn't respond. She let go immediately, returning to the rhythm of her steps. Her focus remained on the canyon walls ahead, on the whispers of movement that might herald danger. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of a boot against stone, or the wind sighing through crevices. The sun climbed higher, searing their path, forcing Thomas to drink sparingly from the small water skin she allowed him. "You really know this land," he admitted finally, voice small. I'd be dead without you." Nellin's jaw tightened. She had heard that before, in different forms, from enemies and allies alike. Praise was meaningless. Only survival mattered. "Keep moving," she said. By mid-afternoon, they reached a narrow canyon lined with red rocks that jutted skyward like jagged teeth. Nalin signaled him to stop and crouched behind a boulder, peering over the edge. A small patrol of riders appeared in the distance, scanning the area. "The hunters," Nalin's eyes narrowed. She gestured for Thomas to stay low. "You stay behind me. Follow exactly." The patrol passed, oblivious to the hollow just beyond their line of sight. Thomas exhaled shakily. "That was close. Closer than you realize," Nalin said, scanning the horizon again. "If they saw you, it would be over." "Understand?" He nodded. "I understand." Something in his voice, the way it wavered between fear and relief, stirred a brief flicker inside her, a pang she quickly shoved aside. She couldn't afford attachments. Not yet. Night fell slowly over the desert, bringing a chill that seeped into their bones. Nalin made a small camp in a hollow beside a boulder. She crouched near the entrance, bow in hand, while Thomas tried to warm himself by a tiny fire she allowed. "You really trust me to follow you?" he asked quietly, not looking at her. "I do not trust you," she replied bluntly. "I trust necessity and your will to live." He nodded, swallowing hard. I want to prove I can." Nalin's gaze flickered to him. His determination was soft, almost fragile, but it was there. She didn't acknowledge it. Instead, she adjusted her bow, scanning the canyon edges. Hours later, Thomas dared to break the silence again. "Nalin, why are you helping me?" Her eyes found his briefly. "Because the hunters are cruel, and you are not," he swallowed. "Not. I'm just a fool, running in the wrong place at the wrong time." She didn't answer, only glanced toward the shadows outside. But inside, a small ember of something, concern, perhaps, or curiosity, burned. He was soft, yes, but he had survived this long only because of her intervention, and the more she looked at him, the more she recognized a spark, a human flicker that she couldn't yet define. The desert wind rose as the night deepened, carrying distant howls from unseen predators. Nalin remained vigilant, bow close, eyes scanning every ridge, every shadow. Thomas huddled beside the fire, shivering despite the small warmth. And as he watched her, he felt a strange mix of awe and fear. Awe at her skill and composure. Fear at the knowledge that one misstep could end his life. "You never rest," he murmured, almost to himself. "I rest when it is safe," she replied, voice low. "Not when hunted," he nodded, understanding more than he should. The night stretched on, long and unforgiving. Outside, the desert waited. Inside, two souls sat, close but apart, a fragile trust growing amid shadows and survival. For the first time, Thomas felt a glimmer of hope. And for the first time, Nalin allowed herself to consider that perhaps this fragile human beside her could endure, could survive. But the desert was not done with them yet. Danger was always close, and trust was a blade that could cut both ways. The desert morning broke harsh and bright, sunlight cutting through the narrow canyon like a blade. Nalin's eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and unyielding, as if the sun itself could betray movement. Behind her, Thomas stumbled, boots scuffing the sand, sweat already streaking his pale skin. "You need to keep pace," she snapped, voice short. "The hunters will catch up if you fall." "I'm trying," he protested, breath ragged, face flushed. She didn't reply, only turned and vaulted over a jagged stone, landing lightly on the other side. He watched her, every movement precise, confident, almost impossibly sure. He felt clumsy and out of place, and she didn't hide her frustration at his weakness. But she did slow enough to wait, just enough to let him catch up. "You'll survive if you listen," she said flatly, not looking at him. He nodded quickly, swallowing hard. I will." The canyon twisted and narrowed, walls rising like jagged teeth. Nalin led him through tight passages and over rocky outcrops, all the while scanning for movement. She was a shadow among shadows, her dark braids swinging, bow ready, every sense attuned to the desert. Hours passed in tense silence. Then, from a ridge above, the faint sound of hoofbeats reached them, slow, cautious. The hunters were near. Nalin pressed herself against the canyon wall, hand on the bowstring. Thomas froze, fear tightening his chest. "They're close," she whispered. He swallowed, eyes wide. What do we do?" "Move silently." "Follow me exactly," she ordered. They navigated a narrow ledge above a steep drop, sand slipping underfoot. Thomas's boots kicked small rocks down the slope. A rider's shout echoed faintly below. Nalin's jaw clenched. She pressed closer to him. "Do not make noise," she hissed. He nodded, shivering. By midday, they found a hidden alcove in the cliffside, a small shaded hollow with a natural overhang. Nalin crouched, inspecting the area. Thomas collapsed beside her, exhausted, his clothes streaked with sweat and dust. "You saved me again," he said, voice low, eyes avoiding hers. "You are still alive," she said, tone flat. "That is enough, but why?" He persisted, barely above a whisper. "Why risk your people, your tribe, for me?" Her gaze flickered toward him, dark eyes sharp. "Because leaving you would be death, and I do not let death come lightly, not if I can stop it." He swallowed. His hands shook. "I don't deserve this." "You will need to learn to deserve survival," she said, voice like stone. The night came cold and silent, the desert wind carrying faint whispers across the canyon. Nalin set a small fire, careful to keep it low. Thomas huddled near it, his knees pulled to his chest. The pale man's soft breathing contrasted with her still vigilance. "You always stay on guard," he murmured. "Always," she replied. He looked up at her, eyes tentative. "Do you trust me at all?" Nalin's eyes met his, sharp and unreadable. "Trust is earned, not given. But you are learning." Slowly. A quiet smile ghosted his lips. He didn't speak again, and she didn't look away, though the tension in her shoulders eased fractionally. In the firelight, two worlds brushed. One hardened, practiced in survival, the other raw and unprepared, yet alive because of her. The desert was still unforgiving, the hunters still searching. But for the first time, Nalin allowed herself to consider that survival wasn't just about distance, stealth, and skill. Sometimes, it was about holding someone else in your shadow, and Thomas, trembling and soft, was in her shadow now. The dawn was merciless, casting a pale, hot light across the canyon's jagged edges. The air shimmered in the heat, and every rock, every ridge seemed sharper, more threatening. Nalin led the way, bow in hand, moving like a shadow among the harsh reds and ochres of the desert. Behind her, Thomas stumbled along, boots scraping against the stone, sweat already streaking his face. "You must keep pace," Nalin said sharply, voice cutting through the morning silence. I am," Thomas panted, brushing bloodied hands against his face to remove the grit that burned his eyes. "You will break if you falter," she warned. Her tone was cold, precise, the voice of a warrior who had seen weakness punish the unprepared. He glanced up at her, a flicker of fear and awe in his eyes. "I'll do my best," he said, voice trembling. Nalin didn't reply. She didn't need to. Every step, every cautious maneuver she was thinking, calculating, scanning the horizon. Survival was all that mattered, and yet, there was something in the way Thomas followed her that stirred a strange awareness in her chest. He was fragile, yes, soft in ways her people might call useless, but he moved. He survived. And he had looked at her last night in the flickering firelight. Not with fear alone, but something else. Something human, vulnerable, desperate, and oddly compelling. By late morning, the canyon widened, revealing a small desert wash. The dry riverbed cut a jagged line through the sand, flanked by rocks and sparse scrub. Nalin paused, scanning the ridges above and around. The hunters were still out there. She could feel it in the tension in the air, the way the desert seemed to hum with their presence. Thomas lagged behind, tripping over loose stones, panting heavily. Nalin stopped, turned, and glared at him. "Do not fall behind, not now. Not ever." He raised his hands in apology. I won't," she gritted her teeth. It wasn't just survival at stake. It was trust, fragile as glass. And she couldn't afford mistakes. They moved carefully through the wash, Thomas wobbling but staying close. Every shadow made him flinch. Every distant sound made him tremble. Nalin ignored his nervousness, focusing on the canyon walls, the brush, the distant ridges. She could hear the faint whisper of hooves over sand. The hunters were getting closer. Suddenly, one of Thomas's boots kicked a loose rock. The clatter echoed across the wash like a gunshot. Nalin spun, bow raised. Thomas froze, fear etched on his pale face. "They heard it," he whispered. "Move," she hissed, grabbing his arm and pulling him into the shadow of a large boulder. A group of mounted riders appeared over a ridge, scanning the desert floor. Their rifles caught the sun. Nalin's dark eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight. She was calm, precise, a predator assessing her options. She nudged Thomas down behind the boulder, crouching close. "Do not move. Do not breathe louder than necessary." He nodded, chest heaving, face pale with fear. The riders paused, scanning the wash below. One of them dismounted, rifle ready, moving slowly toward the hidden alcove. Nalin's heart pounded, but her face remained an unreadable mask. She raised her bow, arrow notched, fingers steady. Thomas's eyes met hers. What if they see me?" he whispered. "Then I kill them," she said coldly. "And you run," he swallowed, trembling. But when she finally shot, one rider fell silently into the sand, the others retreating just enough for her to drag Thomas further into cover. By mid-afternoon, the desert heat was oppressive. They found a small alcove with a trickle of water, a rare oasis, hidden behind a sheer rock face. Nalin set Thomas down beside the tiny pool. He sank to his knees, drinking greedily, hands shaking. "You're alive because of her," he muttered to himself, voice low. "You are alive because of me," she said, voice sharp, turning to him. Her eyes caught the heat shimmer across his flushed skin, the tremor in his hands. There was vulnerability there, yes, but also a spark of determination. He had survived every step so far, only because she had guided him. Thomas looked up at her, a quiet awe in his eyes. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't," she said flatly. "You survive. That is enough." And yet, when he looked at her again, there was a flicker, something in his gaze that unsettled her. Something human, soft, dangerous in its innocence. Night came early in the canyon, shadows swallowing the desert floor. Nalin crouched outside the alcove, bow in hand, eyes scanning every ridge. Thomas huddled near the fire she allowed, trembling despite the warmth. "You always watch," he murmured, voice barely above the crackle of the flames. "Always," she replied. Silence followed. And yet, as they sat there, the desert around them alive with the cries of distant predators and the faint wind, a subtle change occurred. Thomas began to rely on her, not just for survival, but for courage. And Nalin, for all her training, all her skill, began to feel the faintest pull of something forbidden. Compassion, curiosity, perhaps even attraction. The desert night deepened, cold and relentless. But for the first time, neither of them moved completely alone. Two lives bound by shadows, by danger, by the slow, unspoken recognition that sometimes survival was not enough. Sometimes it was about the human connection that grew quietly, dangerously in the spaces between fear and trust. The sun rose blood-red over the horizon, casting long shadows across the jagged desert canyon. Every ridge, every crevice seemed to shimmer with heat and threat. Nalin moved like a shadow, bow ready, eyes scanning. Behind her, Thomas stumbled, boots scuffing rocks, his pale face already sunburned and streaked with dust. The riders were close now. Nalin could feel it. The faint echo of hooves carried on the wind, the distant clang of metal against leather, the soft murmur of voices. They had been relentless, and now exhaustion was beginning to weigh on both of them. "You must keep moving," Nalin said, voice low but hard. I can't," Thomas panted, falling to his knees, hands digging into the sand. Nalin froze, crouched behind a boulder. The riders were closer now, shadows moving along the ridges above. Her dark eyes flicked to Thomas, her jaw tight. "You survive," she said coldly. "Or you die. Which is it? I'll try," he gasped, her lips pressed into a thin line. She could not carry him through the entire canyon. Not if the hunters caught wind of their hiding place. She had protected him this long. Longer than she had planned, longer than she should have. And yet, something in her chest stirred, a pull she could not name. They crept forward, Thomas limping behind, clutching a small stick as though it were a weapon. Nalin moved like a ghost over the hot stone, every muscle taut, every sense alive. The canyon twisted, narrowing into a tight wash, red rock walls rising sharply on either side. From above, a rider's shout pierced the silence. Nalin pressed Thomas to the ground, body shielding him as arrows hissed past. She fired her own bow with deadly precision, each shot finding a mark. The air rang with the whistling of arrows, the stamping of hooves. Thomas huddled, face pressed to the earth. I can't," he whispered. "You can," she said fiercely. "You are alive because I made you alive. Move when I tell you." Hours passed. The canyon twisted like a maze, each turn more dangerous than the last. Thomas stumbled repeatedly, but Nalin stayed close, guiding him with firm hands, sharp words, and the occasional silent drag when he faltered. Sweat and dust clung to his skin. His lips were cracked, his breath shallow. And yet, in this crucible of fear and exhaustion, something shifted. He began to trust her completely, to follow every word, every motion. And Nalin, though she would never admit it aloud, began to rely on his persistence, his stubborn desire to survive, even if clumsy and terrified. By nightfall, they reached a hidden canyon mouth, a natural stone alcove shielded by a jagged overhang. The desert wind howled outside, carrying the faint echoes of distant hooves. Nalin crouched, bow at the ready, scanning every shadow. Thomas collapsed beside her, shivering, exhausted beyond measure. "You made it this far," she said, voice low. I couldn't have without you, he whispered, voice hoarse, eyes meeting hers. She didn't answer immediately. Her dark eyes softened just slightly, catching the firelight she had allowed to glow in the alcove. She saw the exhaustion, the fear, the vulnerability, and something more. A quiet, stubborn courage that had carried him this far. You are alive, she said finally. That is enough, Thomas's hands shook. I don't deserve this. I shouldn't. You survive, she repeated, her voice steady. That is the measure of worth here. And in the quiet of the desert night, with distant predators calling, wind wailing, and danger still whispering at the edges of their world, Thomas did something unexpected. He reached out, hand hovering, unsure, then settled it lightly on hers. Nalin's dark eyes met his. For a heartbeat, the canyon seemed to fall away. Survival, danger, fear. All of it mattered less than the warmth of human connection she had tried so hard to deny. The hunters had not given up. From the ridges above, faint voices and hoofbeats carried across the desert. Nalin pushed herself upright, bow in hand. We finish this, she said, fierce and unyielding. They moved like shadows. Nalin's arrows found their marks with unerring precision. Thomas followed, guided by her, moving faster now, sharper, despite exhaustion. They navigated the canyon's treacherous paths, using shadows, rocks, and quick maneuvers to evade their pursuers. And when the last rider finally fell behind, Nalin allowed herself a small exhale. Thomas stumbled, chest heaving, eyes wide. We did it? He asked. We survived, she corrected, voice hard but with a flicker of warmth. They rested under the stars, the desert cool against their tired bodies. The canyon was silent now, save for the soft rustle of wind. Nalin finally allowed herself to relax slightly, sitting with her bow laid aside. Thomas remained close, still trembling, but alive. You saved me, he said softly. And you survived because I chose to, she replied, dark eyes catching the starlight. He looked at her, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and something softer, something dangerous. I think I'd follow you anywhere, he admitted, Nalin's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer, but the faintest flicker of something in her gaze, recognition perhaps, or acceptance, lingered. The desert was still harsh, still unforgiving, but in this moment, they were no longer just hunter and hunted. Two lives intertwined by danger, trust, and a slow, undeniable connection that neither dared name aloud. The desert night stretched infinite, and for the first time, Nalin allowed herself to believe that survival could mean something more than endurance. It could mean connection. It could mean trust, and maybe, just maybe, it could mean love.